The camera's shutter clicked just as the dust devil swirled past, and Catherine Hartwell knew she had captured something extraordinary in the New Mexico territory on that scorching afternoon in July of 1885. But what she did not know was that the tall cowboy watching from beside the livery stable would change the entire trajectory of her carefully planned expedition. Catherine had arrived in Santa Fe 3 days prior, her wagon loaded with photographic equipment, glass plates carefully wrapped in cotton batting, and enough supplies to last her 6 months as she documented the untamed territories for the Geographic Survey Commission back in Philadelphia. At 24 years old, she was one of only a handful of female photographers working west of the Mississippi, and she intended to prove that her work could rival any man's. The commission had been skeptical when she proposed this expedition, but her previous work documenting the industrial expansion in Pennsylvania had been so meticulously detailed that they reluctantly agreed to fund her journey, albeit with significantly less money than they would have provided a male photographer. The heat shimmered off the adobe buildings as Catherine adjusted her tripod, trying to capture the way the afternoon light painted the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in shades of purple and gold. Her dark hair, pinned severely beneath a wide-brimmed hat, was already escaping in damp tendrils against her neck. Her practical traveling dress, made of lightweight cotton in a sensible brown color, was covered with a canvas apron filled with the tools of her trade. She had just finished preparing another plate when she heard the jingle of spurs behind her. "That's quite the contraption you have got there, miss." Catherine turned to find herself looking up at a man who seemed to embody everything she had read about the West in dime novels, except his eyes held an intelligence that those cheap stories never quite captured. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his dusty Stetson. His jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and his clothes bore the wear of a man who spent his days in the saddle. But it was his eyes, a striking shade of green that seemed almost impossible against his tanned face, that held her attention. "It is a camera," Catherine said, keeping her voice level and professional. She had learned early in her career that showing any uncertainty invited dismissal. "I am documenting the territory for a geographic survey." "I know what a camera is," he said, and there was amusement in his voice rather than offense. "I have just never seen one operated by someone so." He paused, seeming to search for the right word, female. Catherine supplied, her tone cooling. "I was going to say determined," he replied, that hint of amusement deepening. "The way you have been setting up that shot for the past 20 minutes, adjusting and readjusting, you have got the eye of an artist." Catherine felt her defensive posture soften slightly. "You have been watching me for 20 minutes. I have been waiting for my horse to be reshod," he gestured toward the livery. "Your dedication seemed more interesting than watching the blacksmith work." "I am James McCrae, though most folks call me Jamie." He extended a work-roughened hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Catherine shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing, respectful. "Catherine Hartwell." "Well, Miss Hartwell, I have a proposition for you." Jamie's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, she noticed. "I am heading out to my ranch tomorrow, about 20 miles north of here. The land up there is something special, untouched and wild in ways that even this territory is losing. If you are looking to document the real West, you should see it. And if you are amenable, I would like to be in your photographs." Catherine blinked, surprised by the directness of his request. "You want to be photographed?" "I want to be remembered," Jamie said, and suddenly his expression was serious, almost vulnerable. "In 50 years, 100 years, when all this is gone and paved over with progress, I want someone to look at your pictures and know that we existed, that this life meant something." There was something in his words that resonated deep in Catherine's chest, an echo of her own driving purpose. She had taken up photography not just as a profession, but as a form of preservation, a way to hold on to moments that would otherwise disappear like morning dew in the desert sun. "That is precisely why I am here," she said softly. "Then we understand each other." Jamie's smile returned, warmer this time. "So what do you say? Will you photograph my ranch? I can guarantee you shots you would not get anywhere else. Springs that run crystal clear, canyons that seem to touch the sky, and herds of mustangs that have never known a rope." Catherine's practical mind warred with her artistic ambitions. She had a schedule to keep, predetermined locations to visit based on the commission's requirements. But Jamie's description painted pictures in her mind that her camera ached to capture. "I would need to bring all my equipment. My wagon is quite heavy. The road is rough but passable. I will help you." He said it as simple fact, not as a favor that would require repayment. Then yes, Catherine decided, feeling a thrill of excitement that had nothing to do with photography and everything to do with the way Jamie's entire face lit up at her acceptance. "I will photograph your ranch, and I will include you in the frames, Mr. McCrae." "Jamie," he corrected. "If we are going to be working together, formality seems unnecessary." "Then you must call me Catherine." They shook hands again, and this time Catherine noticed the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers, the way his thumb brushed almost unconsciously across her knuckles before he released her. It was a gesture so brief she might have imagined it, but the warmth that bloomed in her chest suggested otherwise. The next morning arrived with the pink and orange promise of another scorching day. Catherine had risen before dawn to pack her wagon, checking and rechecking that every piece of equipment was secured properly. The glass plates were particularly fragile, and she had learned through painful experience that even the smallest crack could ruin hours of work. She had just finished strapping down the last trunk when Jamie appeared, leading 2 horses and a pack mule. "I thought you might want company on the ride," he said. "Your wagon will be slower, but if you are comfortable riding, we could go ahead and I could show you the property before we bring up your equipment." Catherine hesitated. She had learned to ride as a girl back in Pennsylvania, but it had been several years since she had been in a saddle. Still, the prospect of spending the day riding beside Jamie, seeing the land through his eyes before she tried to capture it through her lens, was too appealing to refuse. "I would like that." The horse Jamie had brought for her was a gentle mare named Rosie, with a coat the color of autumn leaves and a patient temperament that immediately put Catherine at ease. Once she was mounted, the muscle memory returned, and soon they were riding north out of Santa Fe, leaving the wagon to follow with a young man Jamie had hired to drive it. The land opened up before them in a way that made Catherine's fingers itch for her camera. They rode through high desert dotted with pinon and juniper, past red rock formations that seemed to glow from within in the early morning light. Jamie proved to be an excellent guide, pointing out features of the landscape with the easy knowledge of someone who had spent his whole life reading the land like a book. "I was born in Texas," he told her as they paused to water the horses at a small creek. "My father was a cattleman who came out after the war. The big war between the states. He had fought for the South and could not stomach going back to Georgia after, so he headed west. Met my mother in San Antonio and they settled on a small ranch near Uvalde. I was the youngest of 5 boys." "Were you close to your brothers?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious. She had been an only child, raised by a widowed father who had encouraged her education but had never quite understood her passion for photography. Jamie's expression grew distant. "We were once. But the West has a way of scattering families. My oldest brother, Thomas, got himself killed in a range war when I was 15. John, the second oldest, took the news hard and went north to Montana. Last I heard, he had married a Blackfoot woman and was running horses. Matthew and Luke, the middle 2, they stayed on the family ranch. When our father died 8 years ago, they inherited it together. I got my portion in cash, and I came here to New Mexico to build something of my own. That must have been difficult leaving them." "It was necessary," Jamie said simply. "Matthew and Luke were already married with children on the way. There was not enough land for all of us, and I did not want to be the uncle who stayed on out of charity." I wanted my own place, my own legacy. So I took my inheritance and I bought 320 acres of the most beautiful land I had ever seen. That was 6 years ago, and I have been building ever since. Building what exactly? Catherine asked. Jamie's eyes gleamed with passion as he described his vision. He was not just running cattle like most ranchers. He was trying to create something sustainable, a ranch that worked with the land rather than against it. He had studied the way the native peoples managed the territory, how they moved with the seasons and never took more than they needed. He was experimenting with rotating his herds, letting the land rest and recover. He had even brought in sheep, which most cattlemen would consider heresy because they thrived on different grasses and could help keep the rangeland healthy. Most folks think I am crazy, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. Old Sam Crenshaw, who owns the spread east of mine, says I am playing at being a rancher instead of doing real work. But I have seen what happens when you overgraze land, when you push it too hard. It dies, and then you have to move on. I do not want to be a locust, Catherine. I want to build something that will last for generations. Catherine found herself captivated not just by his words, but by the intensity with which he spoke them. Here was a man who thought about the future, who cared about legacy in a way that transcended simple accumulation of wealth. It was rare, she thought, to find someone whose values aligned so perfectly with her own desire to document and preserve. They rode on, and the land began to change. The high desert gave way to rolling grasslands dotted with cattle bearing Jamie's brand, a simple MC connected by a horizontal line. Then they climbed again, moving into foothills where ponderosa pines provided blessed shade and the air smelled of resin and earth. Finally, as the sun approached its zenith, they crested a ridge and Catherine gasped at the vista that spread before her. The ranch house sat in a natural bowl surrounded by red rock cliffs that rose like cathedral walls. A spring bubbled up from the rocks, feeding a clear pool before meandering away in a creek lined with cottonwoods and willows. The house itself was built of adobe and timber, long and low to withstand the wind, with a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it, she could see a barn, several outbuildings, and corrals built from smoothly weathered wood. But it was the setting that took her breath away. The cliffs created a natural amphitheater, and the way the light struck them painted the rocks in shades of crimson, orange, and gold. It was, quite simply, one of the most beautiful places Catherine had ever seen. "This is your ranch," she breathed. "This is home," Jamie said, and there was such pride and love in his voice that Catherine felt a pang of something she could not quite name. Envy, perhaps, or longing. She had never had a place that felt like that to her. Her father's house in Philadelphia had been comfortable but cold, filled with dark furniture and darker memories after her mother's death. She had spent her adult life moving from place to place, documenting other people's homes and lives, but never settling into her own. They rode down into the bowl, and as they approached the house, a door opened and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair braided in a crown around her head and the upright posture of someone who had spent her life working hard. Her face was weathered but kind, with smile lines around her eyes. "About time you got back," she called out. "I was beginning to think you had gotten yourself lost in Santa Fe. Rosa, I would like you to meet Catherine Hartwell. She is a photographer from Philadelphia, here to document the territory. Catherine, this is Rosa Delgado. She runs this ranch far more efficiently than I ever could." Rosa laughed, a rich sound that seemed to roll through the valley. "He tells the truth, at least. Come, Miss Hartwell, you must be parched. Let me get you something cool to drink." Catherine dismounted, grateful for Rosa's immediate warmth. The older woman led her into the house, which was blissfully cool after the heat outside. The interior was simple but comfortable, with plastered walls painted white to reflect light, rough-hewn furniture that looked handmade, and colorful woven blankets draped over chairs and benches. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace at one end and a massive wooden table that could easily seat a dozen people. Rosa poured water from a clay jug, and Catherine drank gratefully. The water was sweet and cold, clearly fresh from the spring. As she drank, she studied the room more carefully, noting the details that spoke of the people who lived here. There were books on a shelf, more than she would have expected in such a remote location. A guitar hung on the wall beside the fireplace. Bundles of herbs dangled from the ceiling beams, filling the air with sage and lavender. "Jamie tells me you want to photograph the ranch," Rosa said, settling into a chair across from Catherine. "This is good. He works so hard on this place, but he never thinks to show anyone what he has built. It is like he is hiding out here." "I am not hiding," Jamie protested, though his tone was fond. He had followed them inside and now leaned against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. "I am just selective about company." "Selective means lonely," Rosa said bluntly. "When was the last time you went to a dance in town? When was the last time you spent time with people your own age?" Jamie's ears reddened slightly, and Catherine found herself charmed by his embarrassment. "I went to town 3 days ago, to pick up supplies, not to socialize." "This is not the same thing." Rosa turned to Catherine with a conspiratorial smile. "You see what I work with, a man who has built a paradise but wants to live in it like a hermit." "I am not a hermit," Jamie said, but there was no real heat in his protest. "I have ranch hands." "I have neighbors, sort of. I have you." "I am your housekeeper, not your companion. You need friends, Jamie. You need a life beyond cattle and land management." Rosa's expression softened. "Your mother, God rest her soul, would have scolded me for letting you become so isolated." The mention of Jamie's mother brought a flicker of pain across his face, quickly masked. Catherine found herself wanting to know more, wanting to understand the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes, but she knew better than to pry. Instead, she said, "Perhaps photographing the ranch will help. If the images turn out as well as I hope, they could be published. People would see what you have built here." "Is that what you want?" Rosa asked Jamie. "Recognition?" "I want it recorded," Jamie said quietly. "I want someone to know that we tried, that we cared. Catherine understands that." The look he gave her was so direct, so full of unspoken understanding, that Catherine felt her breath catch. There was something forming between them, she realized. Something that had started with his request to be in her photographs, but was growing into something more substantial with each shared moment. The wagon arrived in the late afternoon, driven by the young man Jamie had hired. Together, they unloaded Catherine's equipment, setting it up in one of the outbuildings that Jamie had cleared out for her use. It would serve as both her darkroom and her studio, with heavy curtains to block out the light when she processed her plates. Catherine directed the placement of each piece with exacting precision, and Jamie followed her instructions without question, seeming to understand that this was her realm, her expertise. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, painting the cliff walls in shades of burgundy and purple. Rosa had prepared a meal of roasted chicken, beans cooked with green chilies, and warm tortillas that melted in the mouth. They ate on the porch, watching the stars emerge in a sky so clear and dark that Catherine could see the river of the Milky Way stretching overhead. "I have never seen stars like this," she murmured, her plate balanced on her lap. "One of the benefits of being far from town," Jamie said. He sat beside her on the porch steps, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling night air. "No lights to compete with them. It is extraordinary." Catherine tried to imagine how she might photograph this, the vast sweep of the night sky, the way the stars seemed close enough to touch, but she knew the limitations of her equipment. Some things could only be experienced, not captured. "What made you become a photographer?" Jamie asked, his voice quiet so as not to disturb the peace of the evening. Catherine considered the question, tracing back through her memories to find the beginning of her passion. "My father was a professor of natural sciences. He believed in the power of observation, of recording and cataloging the world. When I was 12, A photographer came to our school to take portraits of the students. I watched him work, watched him disappear under that black cloth and then emerge with an image captured on a plate. It seemed like magic to me, the idea that you could freeze a moment, preserve it forever. I begged my father to let me apprentice with a photographer, and eventually he agreed. I think he hoped I would outgrow it, find it too difficult or too tedious, but I loved every aspect of it. The chemistry, the precision, the art of seeing. I loved the way a good photograph could tell a story without words. And now you are here telling the story of the West. Trying to, Catherine corrected. There is so much to capture, so much that is changing. In 10 years, 20 years, so much of this will be gone, turned into farms and towns and railroads. I want to preserve what exists now before it is too late. We are alike in that, Jamie said, both trying to hold on to something precious before it slips away. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves, a sound like running water. Catherine felt something settling in her chest, a sense of rightness she had not experienced in a long time. Tomorrow, she said, I would like to start photographing. The morning light on those cliffs will be spectacular. And you will put me in the frame. Jamie asked, and there was something almost teasing in his tone. If you insist on being documented for posterity, then yes, I will put you in the frame. I do insist, he said firmly. In fact, I would like to be in every future frame you take while you are here. Catherine turned to look at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Every frame, that is quite a commitment. I am a committed man, Jamie said, and his eyes held hers in the starlight. When I decide something is worth my time, worth my attention, I give it everything. And I have decided that you, Catherine Hartwell, are worth being committed to. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. She knew she should protest, should remind him that she was here temporarily, that her work would take her across the territory and then back to Philadelphia. But the words would not come. Instead, she found herself saying, "Then you will be in every frame, I promise you that." Jamie's smile in response was like the sun coming up. And Catherine knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she was falling in love with this cowboy who wanted to be remembered. The days that followed developed a rhythm as natural as breathing. Catherine would rise before dawn, her internal clock attuned to the photographer's need for the golden light of early morning. She would set up her camera while Jamie went about his morning chores, checking on the livestock, repairing fences, directing his small crew of ranch hands. But no matter what else needed his attention, he always appeared when she was ready to take her photographs, positioning himself wherever she indicated with a patience that surprised her. In the first week alone, she captured him in a dozen different scenes. Jamie sitting on his horse at the edge of the spring, the water reflecting both man and mount in perfect symmetry. Jamie working with a length of rope, demonstrating the art of lasso work against the backdrop of the red cliffs. Jamie standing in the barn door, backlit by the morning sun so that he seemed to glow from within. Each image was a study in the relationship between man and land, and Catherine found herself looking forward to developing each plate, eager to see how her vision had translated to reality. The process of developing photographs was time-consuming and required absolute precision. Catherine would retreat to her makeshift darkroom, working by the dim red light of a special lantern, carefully coating the glass plates with collodion, exposing them to the negative, developing them in silver nitrate, and then fixing the image in sodium thiosulfate. Each step had to be performed in exact order with exact timing, or the image would be ruined. It was painstaking work, but Catherine loved it. There was something almost meditative about the process, the way it required her complete focus and attention. Jamie seemed fascinated by her work. He would often sit outside the darkroom, waiting for her to emerge, and then examine each finished plate with careful attention. He asked intelligent questions about the chemistry, the exposure times, the way she composed her shots. Unlike many men Catherine had encountered, he never dismissed her expertise or tried to explain her own craft to her. He listened, learned, and respected her knowledge. "You have an eye for this," she told him one afternoon as they reviewed a series of plates she had just developed. "Look at how you positioned yourself in this frame. You are not just standing there, you are part of the landscape. The way your body mirrors the lean of that juniper tree, it creates a visual harmony." Jamie looked pleased but also slightly embarrassed. "I just tried to do what felt natural." "That is the mark of a good subject," Catherine said. "Too many people stiffen up in front of the camera, become artificial. You remain yourself." "Maybe that is because you make it easy," Jamie said. "When you are behind that camera, you are so focused, so passionate, it is impossible not to want to give you my best." The compliment warmed Catherine more than it probably should have. She found herself thinking about Jamie at odd moments when she should have been concentrating on her work. The way his hands looked gripping a rope, strong and capable. The sound of his laugh, rich and unguarded. The gentleness with which he treated his animals, the respect he showed Rosa, the easy camaraderie he had with his ranch hands. She was falling deeper, she knew, and there was a small voice in the back of her mind warning her to be careful. She had a job to do, a commission to complete. She could not afford to be distracted by romance, no matter how appealing the man. But her heart seemed to have other ideas, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain professional distance. Rosa noticed, of course. The older woman had eyes like a hawk and seemed to miss nothing that happened on the ranch. One afternoon, she found Catherine in the makeshift darkroom, developing a particularly challenging plate, and simply stood in the doorway watching until Catherine finished. "He cares for you," Rosa said without preamble. "I have known Jamie for 6 years, since he first bought this land, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she transferred the plate to the fixing bath. "We have only known each other for 2 weeks. "Time is not the same out here as it is in your cities," Rosa said. 2 weeks in the West can be worth 2 years somewhere else. Life is harder, more immediate. When you find something good, something real, you do not waste time pretending it is not important." "But I am leaving," Catherine said, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart. "My commission requires me to document multiple locations across the territory. I cannot stay here indefinitely." "Cannot or will not?" Rosa asked shrewdly. "There is a difference, you know." Catherine did not have an answer to that. That evening, Jamie suggested they take a ride up to the high pasture to watch the sunset. Catherine agreed, grateful for any excuse to spend more time with him, even as she warned herself against getting too attached. They rode in comfortable silence, the horses picking their way up a narrow trail that switchbacked up the cliff face. When they reached the top, Catherine gasped at the view. The entire valley spread out below them, painted in the warm colors of approaching evening. She could see the ranch house looking small and perfect in its natural bowl, the thin line of the creek winding through the cottonwoods, the cattle scattered across the grassland like toys. Beyond, the land rolled away in waves of gold and green, stretching to distant mountains that rose purple against the sky. "This is where I come when I need to think," Jamie said, dismounting and helping Catherine down from her horse. "When the weight of responsibility gets too heavy, or when I am trying to make a difficult decision. Something about being up here, seeing how vast the world is, it helps put things in perspective." They sat on a flat rock, shoulders touching, and watched the sun descend. Catherine wished she had brought her camera, but she also recognized that some moments were meant to be experienced rather than documented. This felt like one of them. "Can I ask you something?" Jamie said after a long while. "Of course. What are you running from?" Catherine felt her body stiffen. "What makes you think I am running from anything?" "Because I recognize it," Jamie said gently. "I came out here to build something, yes, but I was also running. Running from the memory of my brother's death, from the expectations of my family, from the feeling that I would always be the youngest, the least important. Out here, I could be my own man." So I understand the appeal of movement, of always having somewhere else to go. But Catherine, at some point, you have to stop running and start living. Catherine felt tears prickling at her eyes, shocked by how clearly he had seen through her. My mother died when I was 16, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She got sick and no one could save her. My father withdrew into his work, and I was left in a house full of grief and silence. I started taking photographs because it gave me a way to escape, to focus on something outside myself, and then it became more than that, it became my purpose. But you are right, I have been running. Running from the feeling that if I stop moving, if I let myself settle, I will have to face all that pain again. Jamie's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. Catherine let herself lean into him, let herself accept the comfort he offered. Pain does not go away just because you run from it, he said. It follows you. The only way through it is to face it, to feel it, and then to let it go, and you do not have to do that alone. Are you offering to help me face my pain? Catherine asked, trying for levity but hearing the tremor in her voice. I am offering you whatever you need, Jamie said seriously. Friendship, companionship, something more if you want it. I know you have your work, your commission. I am not asking you to give that up. But when you are done with your documentation, when you have captured all the images you need, you could come back here. This could be your home base, the place you return to between expeditions, if you wanted. Catherine pulled back slightly so she could see his face. You are asking me to stay. After only 2 weeks. I am asking you to consider it, Jamie said. I am asking you not to dismiss the possibility just because it is fast or because it scares you. Catherine, I have been waiting my whole life for someone who understands what I am trying to build here, who sees the beauty in this land the way I do. And more than that, someone who has their own passion, their own purpose. I do not want to be with someone who will just follow me around. I want a partner, someone who has their own dreams but chooses to share them with me, and I hope that might be you. Catherine's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. Everything he was saying resonated with her own half-formed desires, the longings she had not let herself acknowledge. But fear held her back, the fear of loss, of pain, of letting someone matter so much that their absence would destroy her. I am scared, she admitted. So am I, Jamie said. Terrified, actually. But I have learned that the things most worth having are usually the things that scare us the most. You scare me, Catherine Hartwell. You scare me because I think I could love you completely and forever if you gave me the chance, and that kind of love is a risk. But it is a risk I am willing to take. Catherine felt a tear slip down her cheek and then another. Jamie reached up and gently wiped them away with his thumb, his touch infinitely tender. You do not have to decide now, he said. Take your time, finish your work. But promise me you will think about it. Promise me you will at least consider the possibility of staying. I promise, Catherine whispered, and then, before she could second-guess herself, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, but it felt like a door opening onto a future Catherine had not let herself imagine. Jamie's hand came up to cup her cheek, deepening the kiss slightly, and Catherine felt warmth spreading through her entire body. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Jamie was smiling. I have wanted to do that since the moment I saw you adjusting your tripod in Santa Fe, he admitted. You should have, Catherine said. It would have saved us both some time. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the valley, and then they sat and watched the stars emerge, Catherine tucked safely against Jamie's side, both of them contemplating a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility. The weeks that followed were a revelation to Catherine. She continued her work, documenting the ranch and the surrounding territory with meticulous care, but now there was an added dimension to everything she captured. She photographed Jamie working with his cattle and saw not just a cowboy but a man building a legacy. She photographed the spring and saw not just water but life, the source that made everything else possible. She photographed the red cliffs and saw not just geology but permanence, the ancient rocks that would outlast them all, and Jamie kept his promise. He appeared in every frame, sometimes as the central subject, sometimes as a figure in the background, always present. Catherine found herself composing her shots with him in mind, considering how his presence would affect the image, how his body would interact with the landscape. It became a collaboration, an unspoken dance between photographer and subject. They stole moments together between work. Early morning rides before the heat became oppressive. Evening walks along the creek. Meals on the porch where they talked about everything and nothing, sharing their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Jamie told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the brother who had died and the guilt he still carried for surviving. Catherine told him about her mother's death, about the loneliness of her teenage years, about the way photography had saved her by giving her purpose. Rosa watched them with knowing eyes and said nothing, but Catherine often caught her smiling. 1 month into her stay, a group of travelers passed through the ranch on their way to Arizona. They were a family, a couple with 3 young children, and their wagon had broken an axle on the rough road. Jamie immediately offered them hospitality, inviting them to stay until repairs could be made. The father, a man named Thomas Webb, was a farmer seeking new land. His wife, Sarah, was heavily pregnant with their 4th child and exhausted from the journey. Catherine watched Jamie interact with the family and saw yet another facet of his character. He was patient with the children, who ran wild across the ranch, delighted by the space and freedom after weeks confined to a wagon. He was respectful and kind to Sarah, ensuring she had a comfortable place to rest. And he worked alongside Thomas to repair the wagon, refusing any payment and even providing supplies for the next leg of their journey. "You are a good man," Catherine told him later, as they watched the Webb family depart, the children waving enthusiastically from the back of the wagon. "I just did what anyone would do," Jamie said, but he looked pleased by her words. "No," Catherine said firmly. "Not everyone. Many people would have seen them as an inconvenience, a burden. You saw them as humans in need of help. There is a difference." That evening, as they sat on the porch, Catherine made a decision. "I want to stay," she said abruptly, not giving herself time to overthink it. "Not forever, not yet, but longer than I planned. The commission can wait. They gave me 6 months and I have only used 2. I want to spend more time here documenting this place, learning from you. If the offer is still open," Jamie's face transformed with joy. "The offer will always be open. Stay as long as you like. Stay forever if you want to." "I am not ready for forever," Catherine said honestly. "But I am ready for longer, for more, for whatever this is becoming between us." "That is enough," Jamie said, pulling her close. "More than enough." They kissed under the stars, and Catherine felt something inside her relax, a tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. She was choosing this, choosing him, choosing the possibility of a future that included love and partnership. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The summer deepened, and Catherine's work expanded beyond the ranch. Jamie took her to neighboring properties, introducing her to other ranchers, to miners working claims in the mountains, to a small community of farmers trying to irrigate the desert. She photographed them all, creating a comprehensive visual record of life in the New Mexico Territory in 1885. And true to their agreement, Jamie accompanied her on every expedition, appearing in every frame. They developed a reputation as a pair, the photographer and her cowboy. People began to expect to see them together, and gradually, Catherine noticed that the questions changed. Instead of asking about her work, people started asking when they were getting married. The assumption made her uncomfortable at first, but Jamie just laughed it off. "Let them speculate," he said. "We know what we are to each other. We do not need to explain it to anyone else." But Catherine found herself thinking about it more and more. What were they to each other? They had never formally discussed courtship, engagement, or marriage. They simply existed together in a state of growing intimacy and affection. She loved him, she realized one night as she watched him play guitar on the porch. his fingers moving surely across the strings. She loved his kindness, his vision, his willingness to be vulnerable with her. She loved the way he made her laugh, the way he challenged her thinking, the way he supported her work without trying to control it. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer came from an unexpected source. In late August, a letter arrived from the Geographic Survey Commission in Philadelphia. Catherine opened it with trembling hands, suddenly aware that she had been avoiding thinking about her obligations back east. The commission was pleased with the sample plates she had sent, the letter said, and they wanted her to expand her documentation. They were offering her a permanent position with steady funding to continue her work across the Western Territories. It was everything she had worked for, the validation and support she had always craved, but it would mean constant travel. Months, possibly years, spent moving from place to place. No permanent home, no stability, and most importantly, no Jamie. Catherine read the letter 3 times and then she walked out to find Jamie. He was working in the corral with a young horse, patiently teaching the animal to accept a saddle. She watched him for a few minutes, admiring his skill and patience, and then called his name. He looked up, saw her expression, and immediately handed the horse off to one of the ranch hands. "What is wrong?" Catherine handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his face carefully neutral, and then handed it back. "This is wonderful news, congratulations." "Is it?" Catherine asked. "Is it wonderful? It is what you have been working toward, is it not? Recognition, funding, the ability to continue your work." "Yes, but at what cost?" Jamie was quiet for a long moment. "Catherine, I will not be the man who asks you to choose between your work and me. Your photography is part of who you are. I knew that from the beginning. If you need to take this position to travel and document and fulfill your purpose, then you should do it. I will be here when you return. And if I do not want to return, or if I return so rarely that we become strangers." Catherine felt tears threatening. "Jamie, I love my work, but I love you too, and I do not know how to have both." Jamie's expression shifted, hope and fear warring across his features. "You love me." "Of course I love you," Catherine said impatiently. "How could I not? You are everything I never knew I needed. But this letter, this opportunity, it is everything I thought I wanted. And now I am terrified that I am going to have to choose, and that any choice I make will be the wrong one." Jamie closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and took her face in his hands. "Listen to me. You do not have to choose. We will find a way to make this work. Maybe you take the commission, but you make this your home base like we discussed. You go out for a few months, document what you need to, and then you come back here. We build a darkroom in the house, a real one, and you use the winters to process and organize your work. Or maybe I come with you sometimes, help you with the equipment, be your assistant. We figure it out together, Catherine, because that is what people do when they love each other. They compromise, they adapt, they find solutions." "You would come with me?" Catherine asked, hardly daring to believe it. "If you wanted me to, yes. The ranch can survive without me for periods of time. Rosa knows how to run things, and I have good ranch hands. I built this place to be sustainable, remember? That includes being able to leave it occasionally. And honestly, the idea of seeing new places, experiencing new things with you, it is appealing. I never wanted to be the kind of man who is so tied to his land that he cannot see beyond it." Catherine felt like she could breathe again. "You would really do that, compromise your work for mine?" "It would not be a compromise," Jamie said. "It would be a choice. I am choosing you, Catherine. I am choosing us. The question is, are you?" Catherine looked up at this man who had somehow become her entire world in the space of a few months. This cowboy who wanted to be in every frame of her future, not just photographically but literally. "Yes," she said. "I am choosing us. I am choosing you, and I am choosing to believe that we can make this work." "Then marry me," Jamie said, and Catherine realized he had been planning this, waiting for the right moment. He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple band of gold with a small turquoise stone. "It is not fancy, and I know we have not been courting in any traditional sense, but Catherine Hartwell, I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Will you marry me? Catherine looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the ranch spread out behind him, and she felt certainty settle in her bones. This was right. This was what she wanted. Yes, she said, laughing through tears. Yes, I will marry you. Jamie slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her with a passion that made her forget about letters and commissions, and everything except the feeling of being held by someone who loved her completely. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Catherine looked down at the ring on her hand. Where did you get this? I made it, Jamie admitted. Well, I had it made. There is a jeweler in Santa Fe, an old man named Martinez, who does beautiful work. I gave him the turquoise from a mine up in the mountains and asked him to set it simply. I have been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. This was the right moment, Catherine assured him. Imperfect and complicated and absolutely right. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Rosa took one look at them and started crying happy tears. Finally, she said, hugging them both. I was beginning to think you two were going to dance around each other forever. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in late September, when the heat had finally broken, and the cottonwoods along the creek were turning gold. They kept it simple. A ceremony on the ranch with Rosa and the ranch hands as witnesses, and a traveling minister who happened to be passing through the territory. Catherine wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had ordered from Santa Fe, simple and elegant, with her dark hair pinned up and decorated with wildflowers. Jamie wore his best suit, dark and well-fitted, and Catherine thought she had never seen a more handsome man. They exchanged vows under the cottonwood trees, promising to love and support each other through whatever the future might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jamie kissed her with such joy that the small gathering of witnesses burst into spontaneous applause. Rosa had prepared a feast, and they celebrated with music and dancing and laughter that echoed off the red cliffs. That night, alone in the house, Jamie carried Catherine over the threshold of what was now their bedroom. He set her down gently, his hands trembling slightly. I want you to know, he said seriously, that I intend to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice. I could never regret choosing you, Catherine said, reaching up to cup his face. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, discovering the intimate dimensions of the love they had been building. Catherine had been nervous, her experience limited to vague descriptions from married friends and her own imagination, but Jamie was patient and attentive, focused on her pleasure as much as his own. By the time they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Catherine felt transformed. She was no longer just Catherine Hartwell, photographer. She was Catherine McCrae, wife and partner and beloved. The winter that followed was a time of adjustment and joy. Catherine set up her permanent darkroom in the house, in a room Jamie had added specifically for that purpose. She spent the cold months processing and organizing the hundreds of plates she had exposed over the summer, creating a comprehensive visual record of ranch life. She wrote detailed notes to accompany each image, explaining the context, the people, the significance. She sent batches of work to the commission, along with a letter explaining that she had married and would be using the ranch as her permanent base of operations. The commission's response was cautiously positive. They were concerned about her ability to complete the extensive documentation they required, but they agreed to a modified arrangement. Catherine would spend the spring and summer traveling to various locations across the territory, accompanied by her husband when feasible, and she would spend fall and winter at the ranch, processing her work and preparing for publication. It was a compromise that satisfied everyone. Jamie threw himself into preparing for their future travels. He bought a larger wagon specifically designed to transport Catherine's equipment safely. He studied maps and consulted with travelers, planning routes that would take them to the most significant and photogenic locations. Catherine realized with amusement and love, approaching this the same way he approached ranching, with careful planning and attention to detail. But he also made sure they had time to simply be together, to enjoy the newness of their marriage. They took long rides together across the ranch, now blanketed in snow. They spent evenings by the fire, Jamie playing his guitar while Catherine sketched plans for future photographs. They talked for hours about their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the life they were building together. In late January, Catherine realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling unwell for several weeks, a persistent queasiness that she had attributed to something she ate. But when the symptoms continued and her monthly courses did not arrive, she began to suspect the truth. Rosa confirmed it with the knowing eye of a woman who had helped bring many children into the world. "You are going to be a mother," Rosa said, her eyes shining with joy. "Does Jamie know?" "Not yet," Catherine said, her hand instinctively going to her still flat stomach. "I wanted to be sure before I told him." "Tell him tonight," Rosa urged. "He will be so happy," Catherine was less certain. A baby would change everything, would make their planned travels more complicated, would alter the careful balance they had worked out between her career and their life together. But when she told Jamie that evening, his reaction obliterated her worries. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby in late summer, I think. August or early September." Jamie picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "This is the most wonderful news. A child, Catherine, our child. But what about our plans, the travels we were going to take?" "Plans can change," Jamie said firmly. "The territory will still be there next year and the year after. Our child will only be young once. Catherine, I want to be there for every moment. I do not want to miss this." Catherine felt tears of relief and happiness slipping down her cheeks. "I was so worried you would be disappointed." "Disappointed? Catherine, you have given me everything. This ranch, this life, they mean nothing without you, and now we are going to have a family. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" They adjusted their plans. Catherine would continue her work through the early spring, but only locally, documenting the ranch and the immediate area. As her pregnancy advanced, she would focus on processing her existing plates and preparing them for publication. After the baby was born, they would reassess, figure out what made sense for their growing family. The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine suffered from persistent nausea and exhaustion, and there were days when she could barely get out of bed, much less set up her camera. But Jamie was attentive and supportive, taking over her chores without complaint, bringing her food she could tolerate, sitting with her during the long afternoons when she was too tired to do anything but rest. Rosa was equally devoted, preparing special teas and soups designed to help with the symptoms, offering the benefit of her experience and wisdom. By late spring, Catherine was feeling better, her energy returning even as her belly swelled with the growing child. She resumed her photography, now documenting the ranch through the lens of impending motherhood. She photographed the room they were preparing as a nursery, the cradle Jamie had built with his own hands. She photographed her own changing body, creating a visual record of pregnancy that was unusual for the time but felt important to her. And she photographed Jamie, capturing the mix of excitement and terror that came with approaching fatherhood. "Are you scared?" She asked him one evening as he put the finishing touches on the cradle, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. "Terrified," he admitted. "What if I am not a good father? What if I make mistakes?" "You will make mistakes," Catherine said practically. "All parents do. But you will also love this child fiercely, teach them well, and give them a good life. That is all anyone can do." "I just want to be better than my own father," Jamie said quietly. "He was not a bad man, but he was hard. He did not know how to show affection, how to tell us he loved us. I want our child to never doubt that they are loved." "Then you are already going to be a better father," Catherine said, moving to stand beside him and run her hand over the smooth wood of the cradle. "Because you are thinking about these things, worrying about them, that shows you care." The baby came on a sweltering night in late August, arriving in a storm of labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Jamie stayed by Catherine's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, encouraging her through each contraction. Rosa served as midwife, her experienced hands guiding both mother and baby safely through the process. When their son finally emerged, red-faced and wailing, Catherine felt a surge of love so powerful it almost frightened her. "A boy," Rosa announced, placing the baby on Catherine's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Catherine looked down at the tiny human they had created with his shock of dark hair and his scrunched-up face and felt her world shift on its axis. Jamie leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face, and gently touched the baby's head with one finger. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him Thomas after Jamie's brother who had died young, with the middle name of William after Catherine's father, Thomas William McCrae, Tommy for short. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with a pair of lungs that could wake the entire household when he wanted to be fed. Catherine had worried about how she would balance motherhood with her work, but she found that the two were not mutually exclusive. She photographed Tommy constantly, documenting every stage of his development. And when he was old enough to travel, she began taking him with her on short expeditions around the ranch, carrying him in a sling against her chest while she worked. Jamie was a devoted father, just as Catherine had known he would be. He doted on Tommy, spending hours playing with him, telling him stories, introducing him to the animals on the ranch. Catherine would often find them together in the barn, Tommy gurgling happily while Jamie explained the intricacies of horse care or cattle breeding, as if the infant could understand. "You know he cannot comprehend what you are saying," she teased one afternoon, finding them exactly where she expected. "He will eventually," Jamie said, unbothered. "And in the meantime, it is good practice for me. I am learning how to be a teacher." As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, Catherine gradually resumed more extensive work. The commission had been patient, but they were eager for new material. In the spring of 1887, when Tommy was 18 months old, they planned their first major expedition as a family. They would travel south to the Mexican border, documenting the settlements and landscapes along the way. Rosa agreed to come with them to help care for Tommy while Catherine worked. The expedition was challenging but rewarding. Traveling with a toddler required careful planning and infinite patience. Tommy was curious about everything, wanting to touch and explore, and there were moments when Catherine wondered if they had been insane to attempt this. But there were also magical moments. Tommy's face when he saw his first roadrunner, the way he fell asleep in his father's arms while they camped under the stars. The photographs Catherine captured of her husband and son together, images that spoke of love and family and the continuation of legacy. They documented mining towns and farming communities, military outposts and trading posts. Catherine's work was gaining recognition back east, her photographs appearing in magazines and exhibitions. People were fascinated by her unique perspective, the way she captured not just landscapes but the people who inhabited them, the relationships between humans and the land they were trying to tame. And in every photograph, or nearly every one, there was Jamie. Sometimes as the central subject, sometimes as a figure in the background, but always present. He had kept his promise from that first day in Santa Fe to be in every future frame, and Catherine had kept hers to include him. Their collaboration had become the defining feature of her work, the element that made her photographs distinctive and powerful. They returned to the ranch in late summer, exhausted but satisfied with what they had accomplished. Tommy had thrived on the journey, growing brown from the sun and confident from all the new experiences. Catherine had hundreds of new plates to process, enough work to keep her busy through the winter. And Jamie had new ideas for the ranch, innovations he had learned about from people they had met, methods he wanted to implement. Life settled into a rhythm. Springs and summers were for travel and documentation, with Catherine capturing images across the expanding West. Falls and winters were for processing and family time, with Catherine working in her darkroom while Jamie managed the ranch and Tommy grew from toddler to boy. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah after Jamie's mother, born in 1889, and another son named Benjamin, born in 1892. The house grew louder and more chaotic, filled with the sounds of children playing, animals wandering in and out, friends and neighbors visiting. Catherine's reputation grew along with her family. Her work was now regularly featured in prestigious publications, and she received invitations to exhibit in New York, Boston, even London. She turned down most of them, unwilling to be away from her family for extended periods. But she did make one trip to Philadelphia in 1893 to receive an award from the Geographic Survey Commission. Jamie came with her, leaving the children with Rosa, and together they experienced the city where Catherine had grown up. "This is where you learn to be who you are," Jamie said as they walked through the streets, so different from the open spaces of New Mexico. "This is where I learned what I did not want to be," Catherine corrected. "I learned who I really am out west with you." They visited her father's grave, and Catherine introduced Jamie to the man who had raised her, even though he could not respond. "I wish you could have met him," she told Jamie as they stood by the headstone. "I think he would have liked you, or at least he would have respected the way you respect my work." "I wish I could have met him too," Jamie said, "but in a way I know him through you. The precision you bring to your work, the way you approach problems methodically, that came from him. He helped make you who you are, and I am grateful for that." They returned to New Mexico with relief, both of them eager to be back in the wide open spaces they had come to think of as home. The children greeted them with wild enthusiasm, and Catherine felt complete again, surrounded by her family in the place she loved. The years rolled on, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the changing seasons. Catherine continued her work, now training other photographers who came seeking her expertise. She published several books, collections of her photographs with accompanying text that documented the transformation of the West from wilderness to civilization. Her images became historical records, capturing a way of life that was rapidly disappearing as the 20th century approached. Jamie's ranch prospered. His methods, once dismissed as crazy, proved to be sustainable and profitable. Other ranchers began adopting his techniques, rotating their herds and managing the land with care. He became respected as an innovator, though he always said the real innovation was in listening to the land rather than trying to dominate it. Their children grew and developed their own interests. Tommy proved to have a gift for working with animals, particularly horses. He could gentle even the wildest Mustang with patience and soft words, and by the time he was 15, neighboring ranches were paying him to train their horses. Sarah inherited her mother's artistic eye but applied it to painting rather than photography, covering canvas after canvas with the landscapes she loved. Benjamin was the scholar, always reading, fascinated by science and nature, asking questions that sent them all scrambling for answers. In 1902, when Tommy was 17, he announced his intention to start his own ranch. He had saved money from his horse training, and with help from Jamie, he purchased land adjoining their property. Catherine photographed the day they broke ground on his house, capturing her son's pride and determination, so reminiscent of his father at that age. "We are getting old," she told Jamie that night, watching the sun set from their porch. "Speak for yourself," Jamie teased. "I am in my prime." "You are 43 years old, you have gray in your hair, and you grunt every time you stand up," Catherine said, but she was smiling. "The gray makes me distinguished," Jamie insisted, "and the grunting is just sound effects, makes me seem more dramatic." Catherine laughed and leaned against him, comfortable in the way only decades of marriage could create. They sat in silence for a while, and then Jamie said, "Do you have any regrets about choosing this life instead of focusing solely on your career?" Catherine considered the question seriously, as it deserved. "No," she said finally. I do not regret a single choice I made. I have had a career, a meaningful one that I am proud of, but I also have this." She gestured at the ranch, the life they had built. "I have you and our children and this place that is ours. If I had pursued my career single-mindedly, I might have been more famous, more acclaimed, but I would have been alone." And Catherine Hartwell, the famous photographer, would have been a much smaller person than Catherine McRae, the photographer, wife and mother. "I am glad you think so," Jamie said, "because you have given me the greatest gift anyone could give. You have made my life full. You have been in every frame of my future, just like I asked you to be, and I hope you will continue to be in every frame I have left. Always," Catherine promised, kissing him softly. "For as long as we both have." Sarah married in 1908, a young teacher from Santa Fe who had come to the ranch to paint the landscapes and had fallen in love with their daughter instead. Catherine photographed the wedding, capturing the joy and hope on the young couple's faces. They settled in Santa Fe, where Sarah opened a gallery and her husband taught at the local school. Benjamin left for college in 1910, heading east to study biology. Catherine worried about him being so far away, but Jamie reminded her that they had raised him to be independent and curious. He would come back, or he would not, but either way he would be living the life he chose. Tommy married in 1911, a neighboring rancher's daughter named Elizabeth who was as capable and determined as he was. They built their life on the ranch Tommy had started, and in 1912, they gave Catherine and Jamie their first grandchild, a boy they named James after his grandfather. Catherine wept when she held him, overwhelmed by the continuation of their legacy, the knowledge that their love had created not just children but an entire future generation. The West continued to change around them. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers and more development. Towns grew into cities. Automobiles began to replace horses on the roads, though Jamie refused to own one, declaring them noisy and unreliable. The old ways were disappearing, just as Catherine had known they would when she first came to document the territory back in 1885. But some things remained constant. The ranch endured, now run by Jamie with help from Tommy, a partnership between father and son that brought joy to them both. Catherine's darkroom continued to produce images, though now she focused on teaching and preservation of her existing work rather than constantly seeking new subjects. And their love endured, deepening and strengthening with each passing year. In 1915, on their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Family and friends came from across the territory, filling the house and spilling out onto the grounds. Someone had collected Catherine's photographs from over the years, creating a display that showed the evolution of both her work and their life together. Catherine walked through the exhibit with Jamie, revisiting decades of memories frozen in silver and glass. "Look at us," Jamie said, stopping in front of an early photograph of himself on horseback by the spring. "We were so young." "We were," Catherine agreed, "young and foolish and so certain we could make it work." "And we did," Jamie said. "We made it work." "Yes," Catherine smiled. "We did." The party lasted late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Catherine danced with Jamie under the stars, just as they had on their wedding night, and felt grateful for every moment, every choice, every photograph that had brought them to this point. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Catherine published her final book in 1918, a comprehensive collection titled The Territory: 3 Decades in the West. It included her most significant photographs, many of them featuring Jamie, along with detailed notes about the people and places she had documented. The book was widely acclaimed, securing her reputation as one of the most important documentary photographers of her generation. Jamie gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Tommy, though he remained involved and engaged. He still rode out every morning to check on the cattle, still made decisions about herd management and land use. But he also spent more time with Catherine, taking long rides together like they had in the early days of their courtship, sitting on the porch and watching the grandchildren play. Sarah gave them 2 more grandchildren, daughters who inherited her artistic talent. Benjamin returned from college with a wife and eventually settled back in New Mexico, working as a naturalist and conservationist, carrying on his father's work of protecting the land in a different way. Tommy and Elizabeth had 3 more children, filling their ranch house with noise and life. In 1924, on what Catherine calculated was the 40th anniversary of the day they met in Santa Fe, she set up her camera one last time. She had an idea for a final photograph, something to bookend all the images she had taken over the decades. She asked Jamie to stand exactly where he had stood that first day, beside the livery stable in Santa Fe. It took some convincing to get him to make the trip to town, but he eventually agreed. As she positioned him, adjusted her camera, prepared the shot, Catherine felt the weight of all those years. They were both in their 60s now, their faces lined with age and experience, their bodies slower than they once were. But when Jamie smiled at her through the viewfinder, she saw the same man who had asked to be in every future frame, the same intelligence and humor and love. "Are you ready?" she called. "I have been ready for 40 years, Jamie called back. Catherine captured the image, and as the shutter clicked, she felt a sense of completion. This was it, the final frame in the story they had been telling together since that dusty afternoon in July of 1885. Everything that came after would be epilogue, the quiet denouement of a life well lived. But there were still years left, still moments to treasure. Catherine and Jamie settled into the rhythms of grandparenthood, spoiling the grandchildren, passing on their knowledge and values. Catherine taught photography to those who showed interest, sharing not just the technical skills but the philosophy behind it, the importance of documentation and preservation. Jamie taught ranching and land stewardship, emphasizing sustainability and respect for the earth. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1935, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Catherine was 74, Jamie was 76, and they both moved with the careful deliberation of age. But their minds remained sharp, their love unchanged. When someone asked Jamie what the secret to a long marriage was, he simply pointed to Catherine and said, "Choose well at the start, and then choose that person every day after." Catherine's health began to fail in 1938. The years of working with photographic chemicals, of breathing in silver nitrate and other developing agents, had taken their toll on her lungs. She could no longer walk without becoming breathless, could no longer work in the darkroom she had loved so much. It frustrated her, this betrayal of her body, but she accepted it with grace. Jamie nursed her tenderly, sitting by her bed for hours, reading to her, reminiscing about their life together. Their children visited frequently, bringing the grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren to say hello. Catherine held each of them, looked into their faces, saw the future extending beyond her own life and felt at peace. "I am not afraid," she told Jamie one evening as the sun set outside their window, painting the room in shades of orange and pink. "I have had a good life, a full life. I have loved and been loved. I have created work that matters. I have no regrets." "I am afraid," Jamie admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I am afraid of losing you." "You will not lose me," Catherine said firmly. "I will be in every photograph we took together. Every image, every frame. That is what art does, Jamie. It makes us immortal. When you look at those pictures, you will see me as I was, as we were, and that will never die." "But I will miss you," Jamie said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I will miss your voice, your laugh, the way you see the world." "And I will miss you too," Catherine said softly. "But we have had 53 years together. That is more than most people get. We have been blessed, Jamie. We have been so very blessed." Catherine died quietly in her sleep on a cool October morning in 1938, surrounded by her family. Jamie held her hand as she took her last breath, and when she was gone, he sat with her for hours, unwilling to let go. Finally, their children gently urged him away, and they began the process of saying goodbye. The funeral was held at the ranch, beneath the cottonwood trees where they had been married. People came from across New Mexico and beyond to pay their respects. Catherine had touched many lives through her work, and now they all gathered to celebrate her legacy. Jamie stood straight and proud throughout the service, though anyone close could see the devastation in his eyes. They buried her on the ranch, in a spot overlooking the valley, with a view of the red cliffs that had been her favorite subject. Her headstone was simple, carved with her name and dates and one line. She saw the world and captured it forever. Jamie continued on because he had no other choice. He lived for his children and grandchildren, for the ranch that still needed him. But the light had gone out of his eyes, and everyone could see that he was simply waiting until he could join Catherine again. He spent his days going through her photographs, the thousands of images she had created over her career. With Tommy's help, he organized them, cataloged them, prepared them for donation to a museum that could properly preserve and display them. It was his final gift to her, ensuring that her work would outlast them both. On a warm evening in June of 1940, Jamie sat on the porch with a box of photographs in his lap. He went through them slowly, remembering each moment, each place, each frame. And in nearly every one, there he was, just as he had asked to be all those years ago. The cowboy in the photographs aged from a young man to middle-aged to elderly, just as he had in life. But in every image, there was love, connection, partnership. He found the final photograph Catherine had taken, the one in Santa Fe in 1924. He studied it closely, seeing himself as he had been at 63, still strong, still vital, still deeply in love. And he realized that this was how he wanted to be remembered, not as he was now, diminished and waiting for death, but as he had been with Catherine, full of life and purpose. Jamie set the photographs aside and looked out over the ranch, over the land he had built into a legacy. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold, and he could almost feel Catherine beside him, her hand in his, her voice soft in his ear. "We did well," he said aloud, to her, or to the universe, or to himself. "We built something good, something lasting. I hope you are proud of what we made." The wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves, and Jamie chose to interpret it as an answer. He closed his eyes, content, and when Tommy found him the next morning, he had passed peacefully in his sleep, still holding Catherine's photographs, still surrounded by the evidence of their love. They buried Jamie beside Catherine under the cottonwoods with a view of the valley. His headstone matched hers in simplicity. He asked to be in every frame, and he was. The ranch continued, passed down to Tommy and then to his children, preserved and protected as Jamie had always intended. Catherine's photographs were donated to several museums and universities, where they were studied, celebrated, and preserved for future generations. Art historians wrote dissertations about her work, about the unique collaboration between photographer and subject, about the way she had captured the transformation of the American West. But more than her technical skill or her artistic vision, what people remembered about Catherine's photographs was the love that infused them. In every image where Jamie appeared, there was an intimacy, a tenderness, a deep understanding between photographer and subject. You could see, if you looked closely, that these were not just documentary photographs but love letters, visual poems written from one heart to another. And so they lived on, Catherine and Jamie, immortalized in silver and glass. The photographer who had come to document the territory with her camera, and the cowboy who had asked to be in every future frame. Their love story, preserved forever, a testament to the power of partnership, the beauty of the West, and the enduring nature of art created with love. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century. The ranch remained in the family, a working legacy now managed by Jamie and Catherine's great-great-grandchildren. The house had been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remained, preserved as a reminder of the couple who had built it. Catherine's darkroom was kept intact, a museum within the family home, where visitors could see the tools she had used to create her art. The photographs themselves had become famous, studied in art schools and reproduced in countless books and exhibitions. The McCrae collection, as it came to be known, was considered one of the most important visual records of the late 19th century American West. Museums fought over the right to display them, and scholars continued to find new meanings and interpretations in the images. But for the McCrae family, the photographs were more than art or history. They were family albums, connections to ancestors they had never met but whose influence shaped their lives. Every child born into the family grew up seeing the images of Catherine and Jamie, learning the story of how they met, how they fell in love, how they built a life together against the backdrop of a changing West. On the wall of the ranch house, in a place of honor above the fireplace, hung the two bookend photographs Catherine had taken. The first showed Jamie as a young man in 1885, standing beside the livery stable in Santa Fe with his whole future ahead of him. The second showed him in 1924 in the same spot, aged but still vital, his love for the photographer evident in every line of his face. Between these two images stretched 40 years of life, of work, of family, of love. And in all the photographs that filled the space between those bookends, in all the images of cowboys and cattle, of red cliffs and wide skies, of children playing and grandchildren laughing, there was Jamie. Sometimes central, sometimes peripheral, but always present. He had kept his promise, made on that hot July day when he first saw a determined woman with a camera. He had been in every frame, and in being present, in allowing himself to be seen and documented, he had helped create something timeless. The land endured as land does. The red cliffs still glowed in the afternoon light. The spring still bubbled clear and cold from the rocks. The cottonwoods still rustled in the wind. And somewhere in the eternal present of photography, Catherine and Jamie lived on, forever young in some images, forever aging in others, but always together. Their story had become legend in New Mexico, the tale of the photographer and the cowboy who fell in love while documenting the dying days of the Wild West. It was told to children, written about in books, commemorated in exhibitions. But the true testament to their love was not in words or fame or recognition. It was in the land they had protected, the family they had created, and the photographs they had made together. In every frame where Jamie appeared, in every carefully composed image where the cowboy stood against the landscape he loved, there was proof that love endures, proof that partnership creates more than the sum of its parts. Proof that when you ask to be in someone's future, and they say yes, you can build something that lasts beyond lifetimes. Catherine had come to the territory to document a disappearing way of life, to preserve history before it vanished. She had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, creating a visual record that scholars would study for generations. But her greatest accomplishment was not in the images themselves, beautiful and important as they were. Her greatest accomplishment was in the life she had built with the man who had asked to be in every future frame. Because in choosing to include him, in allowing him to be part of her art and her life, she had created something neither of them could have achieved alone. She had created a partnership, a love story, a legacy that would echo through the generations. And that legacy lived on, in photographs and in family, in land and in memory, in every sunset that painted the cliffs the colors of Catherine's favorite plates, in every photograph that showed Jamie's smile, in every moment of love that occurred on the ranch they had built together. The story of Catherine and Jamie McCrae became more than just history. It became a reminder that love and work are not opposing forces, but complementary ones. That asking to be part of someone's future is an act of courage and faith. That saying yes to that request, despite all the logical reasons to say no, can lead to a life richer and fuller than any carefully laid plan. And so the photographs endure, housed in museums and universities, digitized and preserved, studied and celebrated. But they live most fully in the hearts of those who understand what they represent. Not just images of the Old West, but images of a love that was as vast and enduring as the territory itself. A love that asked to be remembered and was granted its wish. A love that existed in every frame, then and now and forever.